She was still in her pajamas when she pressed record. Not because she had planned to. Because her hands were shaking too badly to do anything else, and recording felt like the only thing that made sense. Like if someone else could see it, then maybe it was real and maybe she was not alone inside it. The bathroom light was too bright. She knew how she looked, she didn't care. She held up her left arm. A thin line ran from her inner wrist toward her elbow, shallow, already crusted, the kind of mark that said I could have gone deeper and chose not to. She put her arm down. She looked at the camera. She said, "He told me he could do whatever he wanted." Her voice didn't break on it. That was the thing that would wreck people later, that she said the worst part flat, like she had already said it so many times inside her head that the feeling had been worn off the words. She said it the way you say something you have been trying not to believe. He said it like, she stopped, pressed her lips together, like it was just a fact, like gravity. She was 23 years old. She had mascara on from the night before and a bandage she had applied herself, and nobody had knocked on her door since it happened, and it had been 4 hours. She said, "I don't know why I'm posting this, I just need somebody to know I'm still here." She did not say assault directly. She did not have to. She touched the bandage once absently while she was talking about something else, and that gesture, unscripted-looking, almost unconscious, would be screenshotted 400 times in the first 2 hours. The screenshot spread faster than the video. She spoke for 4 minutes and 50 seconds, then she stopped. She looked at the camera. She said, "I showered before I called anyone. I know what that means for people, I'm telling you anyway." She posted it at 2:03 a.m. Her name was Deja Morant. She was 23 years old. She had 41,000 followers on a platform she had built over 2 years by being exactly what she was: unfiltered, specific, unashamed of the difficult parts of her life. She talked about agging out of foster care at 18 with a garbage bag and no plan. She talked about the boyfriend who brought her to Harlow Falls and the 4 months it took him to leave. She talked about the particular loneliness of a person who had never had a family, and had therefore never learned to ask for help without it feeling like proof of failure. People watched because she told the truth. That was the whole engine of it. And now the truth, or the shape of the truth, or something that wore the truth's face, was a 4-minute 50-second video, and a cut on her arm and a sentence delivered flat as a road. "He told me he could do whatever he wanted." By 5 a.m. it had 30,000 views. By 6 a.m. the cut on her arm had its own hashtag. By 7 a.m. 2 journalists had already called the Greer County Sheriff's Office. The deputy who answered had not yet been briefed. He said he could not comment on active investigations. The journalists posted that response. The internet received it as a cover-up. By 8 a.m. Marcus Webb, 29 years old, 2.1 million followers, known for the particular velocity of his moral outrage, had shared it with the caption, "This woman deserves justice. Share until someone listens, believe her." His share alone pushed it past 200,000 views. After that the numbers stopped meaning anything individually. They were just a tide. By 9 a.m. 3 news stations in 2 states had run segments. One chyron read, "Harlow FALLS woman claims violent sexual assault." Another read, "Survivor SPAKS." A third read, "Alleged attacker still 80 large." None of them had spoken to the Greer County Sheriff. None of them had confirmed an investigation was open. They were running on a video and a screenshot of a bandaged arm and the pressure of being the last to cover something everyone else was already covering. By 11 a.m. a name had emerged from the sediment of online searching. Not through investigation, not through evidence, through proximity and assumption and the particular confidence of strangers who had already decided what happened and were now simply looking for someone to attach it to. The name was Callum Reese. He was asleep when it started. 40 miles north of Harlow Falls, a woman named Portia Reese was being woken by her phone at 11:15 a.m., reading messages she did not understand, starting to understand them, starting to make a sound she had not made since her husband's funeral 12 years ago. He did not know any of this yet. The alarm he finally heard was not his phone. It was his neighbor, knocking on his door at noon, holding up her screen and saying his name like a question. Harlow Falls was the kind of town that knew its own name, but wasn't sure anyone else did. It sat on the county line between Cable County and Greer County in western Tennessee. 2 zip codes, 2 sheriffs, 2 sets of speed limit signs at the edge of town that didn't quite agree with each other. 11,000 people, who had mostly stopped noticing any of that, because when you live somewhere long enough, the administrative absurdities become furniture. Crestview Apartments was in Greer County. Technically, the building itself, 3 stories, beige stucco, an outdoor walkway on each floor that got cold in winter and caught afternoon light in summer, sat inside Greer County's jurisdiction, and that mattered because of what happened when Deja called 911 at 1:32 a.m. The dispatcher who answered was Cable County. She took the call, sent 2 deputies. The deputies arrived at 1:51 a.m., spoke with Deja briefly, and then one of them stepped outside to check the building's address against his county's jurisdiction map. 11 minutes later, he confirmed what he suspected. Crestview was Greer County. He radioed it in. They waited in the parking lot while Greer County was notified and a unit dispatched. The Greer County officer arrived at 2:34 a.m. 43 minutes. Deja mentioned it in her video without editorializing. I called, they came. Then they left me waiting for 40 minutes while a man who cut me was still out there, and the internet did not receive it as a bureaucratic fact. It received it as evidence. By 9 a.m., the wait had become a 60-bullet thread on institutional failure and the systemic abandonment of sexual assault survivors. 2 state legislators shared it. A law professor was quoted by noon. Nobody called either county to ask what had actually happened in that parking lot. Callum Reese had lived in apartment 3C for 3 years. He was 31, a high school science teacher and part-time youth basketball coach, the son of a postal worker and a nurse. He had chosen Crestview because the rent was manageable on a teacher's salary, and the property manager had fixed his leaking faucet within 48 hours, which he had taken as a promising sign and had mostly been right about. He was not a remarkable neighbor. He took his trash out on Tuesdays. He had a basketball hoop in the parking lot he used on weekend mornings, and on those mornings, if any of the complex's kids happened to be out, he let them shoot around with him. He never made a production of it. He just moved over and made room, the way people do when generosity is habit rather than performance. One Tuesday the previous spring, a 10-year-old named Darius from apartment 1A had been shooting alone when Callum came down. The kid's form was terrible, elbow flying out, no follow-through, and Callum had watched for a moment and then said, "You want a tip?" Darius had shrugged in the way of a 10-year-old who wants something very badly and needs to pretend he doesn't. Callum spent 20 minutes with him. By the end, Darius was making 1 in 3 from the free throw line, which was not good and was also, for a kid who had been making 1 in 12, extraordinary. That was the kind of man he was. Nobody was going to write that in a thread. He had seen Deja Morant approximately 8 times, parking lot, mailbox, once outside the laundry room. They had exchanged hellos. He did not know her name until a Greer County detective said it to him at 2:15 p.m. on the day his name went viral, by which point his photo had already been shared on 4 different accounts under the caption "Rapist, Still Walking Free." His school had already received 47 calls, and his windshield had already been marked with something that dragged across the glass from the top corner to the bottom middle. The detective's name was Ria Solano. She told him she needed to speak with him in the measured, uninflected tone of someone who has made this call many times and knows the tone matters as much as the words. He said he would come to the station. He showered first. He put on a collared shirt. He called his sister and told her where he was going and why, or as much of the why as he understood, which was not much. His sister said she was coming. He told her she didn't need to. She said she was coming anyway. He drove to the station with both hands on the wheel and the radio off and a feeling in his chest he could not name. The specific sensation of having become a story in your own absence, of events having moved around you while you were not there to witness them, of arriving at a situation that is already several chapters ahead of where you think you are. He parked, he walked in. The desk officer looked up when he said his name. The look lasted half a second. Callum sat in a plastic chair and waited, and outside his sister was pulling in, and across town Principal Yvonne Drayton was on her 3rd call from a parent demanding to know what the school intended to do about a predator in their children's classroom. And in apartment 1C, directly below 3C, Deja Morant sat with her phone face up on her knee watching the follower count climb past 80,000, feeling something she could not name either. The school board called Principal Drayton at 9:47 a.m. She had been at her desk for 2 hours by then, fielding calls with the careful neutrality of a woman who had spent 26 years in public education, and understood that the institutional response to a situation was often as damaging as the situation itself. The board representative's voice had the practiced calm of someone delivering a decision that had already been made before the call began. He told her that given the social media attention, and given the district's commitment to student safety, it would be appropriate, that word, appropriate, doing the weight of 10 other words, for Mr. Reese to be placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's outcome. She said, "Has he been charged with anything?" The board representative said charges were not necessary for a leave determination when circumstances warranted a precautionary approach. She said, "What circumstances specifically?" A pause, not the pause of someone thinking, the pause of someone deciding how much to say. Then, "Yvonne, we have parents calling, we have board members calling, we have people threatening to go to the press about the district's response time. The volume of public concern is itself a circumstance we cannot ignore." She held the phone for a moment, "And if he's cleared? Then he's reinstated and we issue a statement expressing full confidence. That's the process." She said she understood and that she would handle it. She sat at her desk for 7 minutes after the call ended, and in those 7 minutes she thought about the interview she had conducted 4 years ago when she had hired Callum from a pool of 43 applicants. Her final question, "What do you do when a student doesn't believe they can do what you're asking of them?" He had said, "I find the thing they already believe they can do and I build from there. Every kid has something they trust themselves to do. You find it, you start there." She had hired him in the same meeting. She had never once regretted it. She called him at 10:20 a.m. and told him to come in. He arrived at 11. She met him at the side entrance because the front lot had 2 news vans in it that had appeared in the past hour. She walked him to her office, closed the door, and sat across the desk from him and said, "I need to tell you something and I need you to hear it the way I mean it, not the way the situation is going to make it sound." He said, "Okay." She told him about the leave. She used the language the district required, administrative, precautionary, no presumption of guilt. And she watched his face while she said it and did not look away, because the least she could do was look at him while she did this. He was quiet. Then, "You don't think I did anything?" She said, "This is not about what I think." "I know," a pause, "I'm not asking you to say it on the record, He stopped, started again. "I need one person today who knows I didn't do this." She held his eyes, she said nothing. What she did was keep looking at him steadily without the diplomatic blankness the situation required. He read what was in her face. He nodded once and looked away. She walked him to the side entrance, they shook hands. He went to his car. His windshield was cracked. A line dragged from the top corner to the bottom middle, not shattered, just marked. The kind of damage that says, "We know where you are." He stood in the parking lot and looked at it. A student on the second floor, Aaliyah, 15, who had shared the video that morning with the caption "Monsters walk among us," and meant every word, watched him from the window. She did not know it was his car. She had not yet connected the name she had shared to the man she had watched cross that parking lot every morning for 2 years. He called his insurance company. He drove home. He called his mother. This time she answered. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask whether it was true, which was the question everyone else was sitting on, the question he could feel pressing through every text from people he hadn't spoken to in years. She just said his name, the way she had said it when he was 7 and had fallen off his bike, and she found him sitting in the road holding his knee, too stunned to cry, like his name itself was something she was checking was still intact. He could not speak for a moment. He sat in his parked car and pressed his knuckles against his mouth and looked at nothing. She said, "You come home this weekend, I'll make food." He said, "Mom." "I'll make food," she said again firmly, the way she made decisions that were not open for discussion. "You just come home." He sat in the Crestview lot for 11 minutes after the call ended. Then he went inside. That evening, 6 news segments in 3 states mentioned his name alongside Deja's video. 2 added the word alleged. 1 did not. A 4th ran the screenshot of her bandaged arm beside his staff photo without a caption, letting the proximity do its work. His mother changed her phone number the following morning. He had 34 messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years, all variations of, "I don't know what to believe, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking of you." Which meant, I don't know what to believe. He could not blame them. The world had not yet given them a reason to be certain. His lawyer said, nothing, not one word, not a comment, not a reaction emoji, nothing. He lay on his couch with the TV off and the lights low, and listened to the apartment complex around him, footsteps above, a door on the first floor, other people's ordinary nights. And he tried to reach the version of his life that had existed 48 hours ago. He could not quite get to it. Something was between him and it now, a layer he had no word for, and he did not yet know if it was permanent. Ria Solano had worked sexual assault cases for 19 years. In that time she had interviewed women who were certain and women who were not, women who remembered everything and women who remembered almost nothing, women who cried and women so far past crying they had arrived at a flatness that some colleagues mistook for dishonesty. She had interviewed women who lied not often, but it happened, and she knew what that sometimes looked like, or she thought she did. Because the truth was that lying and trauma could produce identical behaviors in an interview room, and that was the thing nobody in the public conversation about these cases ever wanted to sit with. She had learned, over 19 years, to approach each case as though she had never worked one before. She met Deja at the Greer County substation the afternoon the video went viral. The room was painted the particular shade of beige that suggested someone had once cared about it and then stopped. There was a box of tissues on the table. Deja did not touch them. She was smaller in person than on camera. Sweatshirt, jeans, hair pulled back. The bandage was still on her arm. Her eyes were doing the same complicated thing they had done in the video. Not quite grief, not quite fear, not quite performance, something in the middle of all three that Solano had seen before and had learned to treat as data rather than conclusion. She took Deja through the evening methodically. When she got home, what she did before bed, what time she fell asleep, what woke her, what she heard, what she saw, what happened, the blade, the words, how long it lasted, what she did immediately after, why she showered, how she got the bandage. Deja answered everything. She was consistent on the broad strokes, on specific details, exact time, exact sequence, certain physical particulars. She was less consistent, which in this kind of interview meant very little on its own. Inconsistency in detail was one of the least reliable indicators of dishonesty in assault cases, and Solano had long since stopped treating it as one. What she was listening for was something underneath the details, the register of the voice when it hit certain questions, the places where the narrative felt rehearsed versus the places where it felt retrieved. The blade concerned her, not because Deja mentioned it, because of how she mentioned it. Most people describing a weapon in a moment of terror anchor to it. It becomes the center of gravity in the memory. Deja mentioned the blade twice and moved past it both times, as though it were a supporting detail rather than the thing that should have eclipsed everything else. Solano wrote that down and said nothing about it. She asked about Callum Reese. Deja's face did something when she heard the name. Solano noted it and did not interpret it yet. Deja said she knew who he was. She did not know him well. She was not saying it was him. She did not see a face clearly in the dark. Solano said, but the internet is saying it was him. Deja said, I can't control what the internet says. Solano said, no, but you can tell me whether you have any reason to believe the person who entered your apartment was Callum Reese. A pause, long enough to be its own kind of answer, though not the kind that could be used as one. Deja said, I told you I didn't see a face. Solano wrote in her notebook, 3 more questions, calm, unhurried, the pace of someone who is not going to be rushed by anything outside this room. Then she thanked Deja and walked her out. She went back to her car, parking lot, afternoon light going sideways. In her notebook she had written 2 things. The first was a name, Terry Pitts, 1B from the building's management log, a noise complaint filed 6 weeks ago. A tenant in 1B reported twice for returning intoxicated and having difficulty locating his own door. The second thing was a question she had written before in cases like this, and had found each time that the answer to it changed everything and clarified nothing. What is she afraid of that she hasn't said yet? She pulled up the Crestview parking lot camera footage on her laptop. The exterior cameras covered the lot and front entrance. No interior hallway footage. She started at 1 a.m. and moved forward frame by frame. At 1:31 a.m., a heavyset man at the south entrance, moving with the deliberateness of someone managing his own unsteadiness. Inside. At 1:34 a.m., a door on the first floor opened briefly and closed. At 1:38 a.m., the same man reappeared in the parking lot, stood for a moment, walked back south. She paused the footage, zoomed. The image was serviceable, not crisp. She looked at the man's face for a long time. 3 seconds, maybe 4, a door handle, a confused man in his own building. She picked up her phone and called the building manager. She did not yet know what she had, but she knew the gap between what the footage showed and what 14 comment sections had decided. That gap was the whole case. And in her experience, the bigger that gap, the faster it needed to be closed, because every hour it stayed open was another hour of something being built on top of it that could not be easily undone. Marcus Webb posted his video at 8:14 a.m., 6 hours after Deja's clip had started spreading and 2 hours before the formal investigation had properly begun. The video was 11 minutes long. Marcus was good at 11 minutes. He had the instinct, developed over 4 years of building his platform, for how long a subject could hold attention before it needed a conclusion or a new layer. He layered this one carefully, first the facts as he understood them, then context, then outrage, then a call to action. He said, "I'm not going to name anyone because that's not my place." Then, "But what I will say is that this woman deserves to be believed. She was cut with a blade, and someone in that building knows who did this, and if you're staying quiet, you are part of the problem." He had not named Callum, he didn't need to. The comment section had Callum's name within 9 minutes. Marcus scrolled through them once, his thumb hovering twice over the delete button, and both times he kept scrolling. He told himself it wasn't his job to moderate what people concluded on their own. He almost believed it. The video got 1.4 million views in 12 hours. Among those 1.4 million, 3 people mattered to the story in particular ways. The first was Gloria Trask, 44, a middle school vice principal in Memphis who shared both videos because she believed in the principle that women reporting sexual violence deserved immediate, visible support, that silence was its own form of harm. She shared it with the caption, "This is why we speak up. Believe survivors." She had 1,100 followers. 3 of them were journalists. The second was Bryce Holloway, 17, a teenager in Nashville who had been building a thread since 9 a.m., an aggregation that had gradually become something else, a document of certainty constructed from screenshots and assumptions, and the confidence of someone young enough to believe that the speed of a conclusion is evidence of its accuracy. His thread had 40,000 impressions. It included Callum's name, his staff photo, his employer, and the phrase "rapists don't deserve due process" in the same post. He would delete it 11 days later without explanation, at 2 a.m., in the specific way that people delete things they cannot bring themselves to look at anymore. The third was Eldridge Farrow, 68, a retired circuit court judge in Harlow Falls who watched Marcus's video twice at his kitchen table with his coffee going cold. He had presided over 41 sexual assault trials in his career. He had seen the full range of what those trials could contain, the true and the false and everything in the difficult middle. He finished watching, set his phone down, and called his former law clerk, a woman named Sina who now worked in the county DA's office, and said, "I need you to tell me what's happening with the Morant case before it becomes something that can't be undone." Sina told him what she knew, which was not much. The investigation was 11 hours old. The judge said, "Get me into a room with Solano." Sina said she would try. He said, "Not tomorrow, today." The way he said it left no room for interpretation. By 3 p.m., the Greer County Sheriff had issued a statement. "We are actively investigating an incident reported at the Crestview Apartments complex. We ask that the public allow the investigative process to proceed and refrain from speculation that could compromise the case." 108 words, screenshot and shared online within 4 minutes. The most common response in the comments, "This means they already know who did it and they're protecting him." Another response shared 11,000 times alongside the screenshot of Deja's arm, HER arm, "And they want US to wait." Callum read the statement, he read the comments, he put his phone face down and left it there for 6 hours. At 7 p.m. his lawyer called, "Don't touch your phone tonight." He said he already wasn't. "Laptop too, all of it. I need to know what people are saying." "I know, that's exactly why you shouldn't." He didn't listen. At 10 p.m. he picked up the phone and read for 40 minutes, and what he read was the ongoing, publicly broadcast process of strangers deciding who he was, building a version of him from his staff photo and his job title, and the geography of where he lived, assembling a person from fragments, and then convicting that assembled person with a confidence that had nothing to do with evidence. The word they used most was predator. The second most common was monster. Someone had found his school's parent review page and left 41 one-star ratings in a single afternoon. When he finally put the phone down, he sat in his kitchen in the dark for a long time, not thinking anything in particular, just existing inside the weight of it. The particular, specific weight of being known by people who do not know you, of being a story when you are a person. Outside, Harlow Falls was talking. Gas station. Nail salon. The two bars on the Cable County side of Main Street. The conversation was splitting in the way small-town conversations split when they touch something real, along the lines of who knew whom, who trusted whom, who had reason to believe one thing over another. And in apartment 1B, Terry Pitts was asleep, unaware that his name was in a detective's notebook. Unaware that 36 hours from now his face would be on a laptop screen in a parking lot. Unaware that 3 ordinary seconds of a confused Tuesday night were about to become the hinge on which everything turned. 3 seconds, the distance between a man's ordinary life and the center of a national story. Nobody had measured it yet, but Solano was measuring. She did not sleep the night the video went viral. She sat on her bathroom floor with her back against the tub and her phone in her hand, and watched the numbers move. At 2 a.m. there were 40,000 views. By 6 a.m. the number had stopped being a real quantity of real people, and had become something abstract, vast and directionless, and not quite aimed at her even though her face was at the center of it. She had 41,000 followers before the video. By noon she had 290,000. She read the messages for a while and then stopped, because the volume of them, the love and the rage and the stories strangers were pouring into her DMs, intimate and unhesitating, the worst things that had ever happened to them offered freely to a woman they had known for 6 hours, was too much to hold. She felt it the way you feel something too loud, not the details, just the force of it pressing against you. She was alone. She had called Tanya, her cousin, her closest person, at 2:15 a.m. while still on the floor. Tanya had answered half asleep, and then all at once fully awake, and they had talked for an hour, and some of what Deja said was the truth and some of it was the story she had decided to tell. And the line between those two things was blurry in a way that she herself could not have mapped precisely. Because here is what had actually happened. She had been awake, often awake at that hour, a legacy of the foster care years where the night was unpredictable and her body had learned to stay alert. She was on the couch with the TV low when she heard it, her door handle moving, not a knock. Just the handle rattling slightly as though someone on the other side was pushing at it, testing whether it was locked. It was locked. The sound lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4, then it stopped. She did not move. Her heart was going very fast and the room felt different, the particular way a room changes when you become aware of its walls, its smallness, the fact that you are alone inside it. She sat with her knees pulled up and her eyes on the door and waited for the sound to come again. It didn't. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. She kept listening to it, kept finding shapes in it, footsteps that weren't there, a breath she couldn't verify. She sat with that for 20 minutes before she called 911, and in those 20 minutes something happened that she could not have explained cleanly to anyone, because it did not happen in language. It happened in the place underneath language, where fear and loneliness live together and cannot always be told apart. She had 41,000 followers. She had spoken her life into a camera for 2 years, the garbage bag at 18, the boyfriend who left, the particular exhaustion of a person who has never once been somebody's first call in a crisis. She had given all of that to strangers, and the strangers had given back views and comments and a number that climbed. That was not nothing. But it was also not the thing she had actually needed, and she had known that for a long time without a word for it. Sitting on that couch in the dark, she found the word. Witness, she needed a witness, not thousands. One person who would hear the sound she had heard and say, I believe you, I'm coming. Nobody was coming. Her mind took the fear, which was real. It took the loneliness, which was real. It took the knowledge that no one in the world would drive across town if she called, and it built a story around all of it. Not deliberately, not coldly. The way a drowning person reaches for whatever is closest. A story larger than the truth, a story loud enough to finally be heard. The cut on her arm she made herself. In the bathroom after she called 911, waiting. A shallow line controlled, the blade she kept in the medicine cabinet for breaking down boxes, a thing she had touched 100 times. She told herself it could have happened. She told herself she was just making visible what she had felt, what she had been feeling for years, the specific wound of a life lived without anyone paying attention. She pressed record. She told herself it was not lying. She thought of it as finally being seen. That distinction would not survive contact with daylight. But in the bathroom at 2 a.m., it had felt, for the first time in a long time, like relief. By noon, Callum Reese's name was everywhere. She saw it in her notifications. She saw it in threads people tagged her in. She saw the word rapist next to the staff photo of a man she had exchanged hellos with in the parking lot. She sat with the cold, stomach-dropping knowledge that a name was attached to her story that she had not put there, that she could not remove, that was accruing consequences she could not account for or reverse. She picked up her phone at 4 p.m. and started recording. 4 minutes and 30 seconds of talking around the edges of what she needed to say, and when she played it back she knew it was useless. It clarified nothing. It was fear dressed in language. She deleted it. She called Tanya at 7 p.m. She told her more than she had the night before. When she finished, Tanya was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Deja, what actually happened at that door?" "I heard something, someone tried the handle." "That's it." She didn't answer. "And you're armed." The silence lasted long enough that Tanya understood it without being told. "You have to go to the detective," Tanya said. "You have to tell her." "I can't." "Deja, I can't undo this. I don't know how to undo something like this." She hung up. She sat in the dark. The follower count was still climbing. Someone had set up a donation link in her name and it had raised $6,000 in 7 hours. Somewhere 2 floors above her, Callum Reese was lying on his couch with the lights low and a feeling in his chest he had no language for. 18 feet of concrete and drywall. A story bigger than both of them. And a detective who had been staring at 3 seconds of parking lot footage all afternoon, turning a name over in her notebook, getting closer to the thing that would change everything. The problem with the truth Deja was learning is that it doesn't stay where you left it. It moves. It surfaces. And when it does, it is never just the truth anymore. It is the truth plus everything that was built on top of it, and all of that comes down together. She did not know that yet, not fully. She would by Thursday. Detective Solano found Terry Pitts on a Wednesday afternoon, 36 hours after the video went viral. It was not difficult. She had the footage. She had the building roster. She had a noise complaint from 6 weeks ago describing a tenant in 1B who came home late and had trouble locating his own door. She had a building manager who, when she described the man in the footage, said without hesitation, "That sounds like the guy in 1B Terry. He does that sometimes." She drove to Crestview and knocked on the door of apartment 1B at 2:40 p.m. Terry Pitts answered in a t-shirt and jeans, half awake, with the expression of a man who was not expecting company and was not sure how to feel about it. He was 38, heavyset, a warehouse worker who did night shifts 3 days a week. He had no record beyond a DUI in 2018 that had cost him his license for 2 years. He had lived in 1B for 4 years, paid his rent on time, kept to himself. His one genuine flaw, the drinking, the late nights, the way his key stopped cooperating after a certain number of drinks, was not a crime. Had never been treated as one. He had no idea why a detective was at his door. She showed him the footage. She walked him through the timeline. She asked him to describe his night, where he had been, what time he got home, what he remembered of the route from the parking lot to his door. He scratched the back of his neck. He had been at his brother's. He had had some drinks. He always had trouble with his key when he had been drinking. He thought he had gone to the wrong door once. He didn't remember it clearly. He said he was sorry if he had scared someone. Solano asked if he had entered any apartment other than his own. No, absolutely not. He had tried a handle, or thought he had, it didn't open. He figured out the wrong door and went to his own. He didn't have anything on him. He looked genuinely bewildered when she asked about a blade. She thanked him. She told him not to leave the county. She went to her car. She sat there for a while. The story that had generated 47 calls to a school, cracked a windshield, put the words rapist and predator next to an innocent man's name on 6 platforms, changed a phone number, moved through 2.1 million people in 11 minutes, was this. A confused man with a drinking problem had tried the wrong door handle in his own building and gone home when it didn't open. That was the outside truth, the fuller truth, which she was now beginning to assemble from the inconsistencies in Deja's account and the preliminary medical finding that the wound on her arm was consistent with a controlled, self-inflicted incision rather than a threat made in the dark, was something she was not yet ready to name in writing. But she was close. She drove to the DA's office. She laid out the footage, the timeline, the interview with Terry Pitts, the medical examiner's note. She said what the evidence showed. She said what it did not show. She said there was a man in Greer County who had been publicly named a sexual predator, and the evidence did not support it, and that this needed to be addressed immediately. The DA's office said they would review it. Solano looked at the assistant DA across the desk and said, "Review it fast." She said it without volume, without theatre. Every day this stays open is another day that man's name stays in the search results next to the word rapist. The search results don't update when you clear him. They just sit there. And somewhere out there a woman with a real story is watching all of this and doing the math on whether it's worth coming forward. She drove back toward Crestview. She passed the gas station where a handwritten sign in the window read, "Justice for DJA." She passed the church where, 3 days from now, 60 people would gather to pray for healing and for the perpetrator to be brought to justice. The justice they were all reaching for had already taken a shape that would not fit what was actually true. She picked up her phone and called Callum's lawyer. "This is Detective Solano. Tell your client to sit tight." "What does that mean?" "It means I need 48 hours. She hung up. Harlow Falls in the late afternoon, quiet in the way of places where something has happened and everyone is waiting to find out what it means. She had 48 hours. She intended to use every one of them. The recording surfaced on a Thursday evening, 4 days after the video. It was posted by an account with no profile photo and 11 followers, under a caption that said only, "For those who want the truth." The audio was 2 minutes and 40 seconds long, a portion of a phone call recorded without announcement, with the hollow sound of a phone on speaker in a small room. The voice was Deja's. She was speaking to Tanya. The recording had been made by a former friend of Tanya's who had been present during a call Deja made before she posted anything, at 1 a.m., sitting on her bathroom floor, working out loud what she was going to do. A private call. A moment not meant to be heard by anyone except the person she was talking to. The lines clipped and transcribed and shared in the first 30 minutes. "I just need people to see me. I need something to happen. Nobody listens until it's big enough. It has to be big enough. And then, after a pause, I'll make it big enough." No explicit confession in plain language, but placed beside a video in which she alleged sexual assault and displayed a wound on her arm, the audio did not require plain language. The internet connected the dots in under an hour and did not leave room for the possibility that the dots were being connected wrong. By 9 p.m., Marcus Webb's original video had a pinned comment linking to the audio. By 10 p.m., Marcus had posted 30 seconds from his kitchen counter. He needed time to process. He was committed to the truth wherever it led. He was not going to rush to judgment in either direction. He did not apologize. He did not take the original video down. He sat alone after posting it. His phone kept going. He did not look at it for a while. He had a feeling he had not anticipated. Not guilt exactly, he had believed what he said when he said it, and part of him still believed he had not been wrong to say it. But something that lived beside guilt in the way that neighboring rooms share a wall. Something that pressed. He would spend weeks explaining publicly that amplifying a story in good faith and being proven wrong was not the same as causing harm. He would make that argument coherently. Some people would accept it. Some wouldn't. He would never fully resolve it inside himself, in the way that certain questions don't resolve. They just become part of the furniture of who you are, and you learn to move around them. By midnight, Deja's follower count had dropped 80,000. She had seen the audio at 8 p.m. on a call from Tanya, who was crying, "I didn't know she recorded it, I didn't know, I'm so sorry." Deja had said, "It's okay," 3 times. It was not true and they both knew it. And she put her phone down. She sat on the bathroom floor, the same spot where she had filmed the video, the same flat white light, the same tiles, and she did not record herself this time. She had nothing to record. She had no version of herself in this moment that she could point a camera at and offer to the world as something worth watching. She thought about Callum Reese directly. For the first time in 4 days she let herself think about him, not around the edges but straight on. His job, his windshield, his mother's phone number, the word that would now be attached to his name in search results for years. The 60 people gathering in 3 days to pray for a justice aimed at a man who had been in his apartment asleep. She thought about the door handle, 3 seconds. She had been genuinely afraid, that was real. But fear does not license the destruction of an innocent person's life, and she had known that, and she had pressed record anyway. False accusations of sexual assault cause 2 kinds of damage. The first is visible. The man wrongly accused, his reputation, his career, his family's peace, his name in a search engine next to words that will outlast the investigation by years. The second is slower and less visible but equally real. Every false accusation raises the cost of speaking for the next woman with a true story. It gives the next jury one more reason to hesitate. It hands the next defense attorney one more argument. It puts one more shadow over the next survivor sitting in a room deciding whether anyone will believe her. Deja had not thought about the second kind when she pressed record. She was thinking about herself, about being seen, about the particular hunger of someone who has spent a lifetime invisible. She understood both kinds now. She sat on the floor for 2 hours without moving. Then she got up. She went to bed. She lay in the dark with her eyes open and waited for morning to tell her what came next. It didn't tell her anything useful. The official finding came on a Monday. No charges against Callum Rees. The investigation had concluded that the evidence did not support the account as described, that an alternative explanation for the disturbance had been identified and corroborated, and that the physical evidence was inconsistent with the assault as alleged. A separate review of Deja Morant's account was ongoing. 220 words, posted at 11 a.m., screenshot and shared within 3 minutes. The comment section was different this time. Not reversed, nothing on the internet fully reverses, but different. Quieter in some places, louder in others. The people who had been loudest in the first days were mostly gone, moved on to the next thing the feed had put in front of them. What remained was a specific subset. People who had never quite believed it, people who had believed it and were now processing what that meant about them, and people who believed it still and were looking for the detail that would let them keep believing. Callum was at home when his lawyer called before the statement went public. He sat on his couch and listened to the words that meant it was over, legally, officially on the record, and he said thank you, and he hung up and he did not feel what he had expected to feel. He had expected relief. What he felt instead was something more ambivalent, a release of pressure that left behind not lightness but the full awareness of how much pressure there had been, and how long, and how thoroughly it had rearranged things inside him that he was not sure would rearrange back. He called his mother. She answered on the first ring. He said, "It's done." She made a sound he had heard once before, when he called from a hospital after a car accident he had walked away from, a sound that was not quite crying and not quite relief, something between the two that had no name. He said, "I'm okay, Mom." She said, I know you are." She kept saying it quietly until it was completely true. He was reinstated the following week. Yvonne Drayton shook his hand when he walked in and said, "I'm glad you're back," without the careful institutional language, without the distance the situation had required before. He looked at her and said, "Thank you for what you did." She said, "I didn't do enough." He said, "No, but you did something." That was where they left it, and both of them understood that it was both insufficient and the most honest thing available. He walked into his classroom on a Monday morning. The students were quiet with the specific uncertainty of people who don't know what they are allowed to feel around a thing they have witnessed. He set his bag down. He opened his laptop. He said, "We left off at cellular respiration. Let's pick it up." And he taught because that was what he had come back to do and the best thing he knew how to offer the room. Aaliyah sat in the third row. She had spent the week in the private misery of a 15-year-old who has discovered that certainty can be a form of cruelty. She looked at her desk when he entered. She took notes in the same notebook she always used. On the third day she stayed after class. She stood near his desk and said, "I shared the video. I called you a monster online. I didn't know what was true. I thought I was doing the right thing." He looked at her. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Aaliyah, I need you to learn something from this, not because of me, because of the next time it happens, and there will be a next time." She nodded. "The strength of your feeling about something does not make it true. The speed of a story does not make it true. And the people who suffer most when we skip the truth are not always the ones we think. Remember that." She said she would. She picked up her bag and left. He sat alone after she was gone. 8 days, that was all it had taken. 8 days for the world to decide who he was, dismantle what he had built, and then hand it back to him and walk away. No repair. No mechanism for restoring what a search of his name would return for the next several years. Just, the investigation is closed, you may return to your life, here is your life, it is not quite the same shape as you left it. He sat with that for a while. Then he picked up his bag, turned off the projector, and walked out into the hallway, the ordinary noise of the building emptying at the end of a school day. Lockers and sneakers and voices running over each other. And he moved through it, out the front entrance into the October air, and drove home on the same 4 miles of road he had driven for 3 years. Her name was Patience Okafor, and she had been trying to get the smell of bleach out of her bathroom tiles for 3 weeks. When things felt out of control, she cleaned. Her therapist had told her this was not the worst coping mechanism she could have, and also was not addressing the actual problem, which was the thing she had not yet told her therapist about. The thing she had not told anyone about. The thing she carried from room to room in her apartment like an object she couldn't put down and couldn't figure out how to hold. She was 28 years old, a nursing assistant at a hospital 40 miles from Harlow Falls. The Harlow Falls story had reached her the way it reached everyone who didn't live there, through her phone, through her feed, through the version of events the algorithm delivered to someone who had watched the original video twice and shared it once, and then watched the narrative reverse itself over 2 weeks. She had watched all of it. The video, the hashtag, Marcus Webb, the threads, the screenshot of the arm, the audio, the statement. She had watched the think pieces and the counter-think pieces and the comment section wars that were still running 2 weeks after the fact. She had watched it the way you watch something that is both terrible and instructive, the way you watch something close enough to your own life to function as a warning. The thing she had not told anyone had happened 6 weeks ago. Her landlord, Gerald Prout, 55 years old. He owned the building she lived in and 4 others in the county. He had been, for the 2 years she had rented from him, professional and unremarkable. Fixed things when they broke, prompt with repair requests. She had thought of him as a good landlord, which was not a category she had assumed many people fell into. 6 weeks ago he came to fix her kitchen faucet. He fixed it. What happened after the faucet was fixed was not a rattling door handle. It was not ambiguous. It was not something she had built a story around or needed to interpret. It was specific and real, and she knew it had happened with the clarity that she sometimes wished she did not have, because clarity in this situation was its own particular weight. Gerald Prout had sexually assaulted her. That was the plain fact of it. There was no other word for what he had done. She had called a hotline that night. The person on the line walked her through her options. She said she needed to think about it. She hung up. She cleaned the bathroom. In the 6 weeks since she had thought about nothing else and spoken to no one, and watched the Harlow Falls story develop from beginning to end. On a Thursday night, 6 weeks after it happened, 2 weeks after Harlow Falls had reached its accounting, she sat on the edge of her bed. She thought about what she had, a clear memory. A text from Gerald Prout the morning after, "Hope the faucet is working." The knowledge that she was not the only tenant in his buildings, a neighbor had mentioned without knowing what Patience knew, that he was a little too friendly. She had enough. She opened her camera, she sat up straight, she breathed once and pressed record. She spoke for 22 minutes. She was precise, she was clear, she did not cry. She used the factual, specific language of someone who has spent 6 years in healthcare and understands that precision is protection, that vagueness is what breaks cases and breaks women and breaks the possibility of being believed. She named the date. She named the time. She named what happened. She named Gerald Prout. She pressed stop. She sat there looking at herself on the screen. 22 minutes, the clearest, most deliberate thing she had ever done in her life. She opened the app. She stayed with it, her thumb above the button, the video ready, Gerald Prout 40 miles away continuing to exist in the world. The neighbor who had said a little too friendly, still not knowing what she meant by it. The 4 other buildings and whatever was happening in them. She had enough, she knew she had enough. Her thumb moved out of habit, not to post, to scroll. The automatic motion that happened whenever she held the phone without a fully fixed intention, and the algorithm gave her what it always gave her now, the tail end of Harlow Falls. Still generating content 2 weeks out, a new piece, a response to a response. A comment section still running. She read for 4 minutes. She thought about 47 calls to a school, about a cracked windshield, about the word rapist next to an innocent man's name in a result that would still appear in 5 years, about a mother's changed phone number, about Bryce Holloway somewhere in Nashville, 17 years old, having deleted his thread at 2 a.m. without explanation. About Marcus Webb in his kitchen, his private guilt pressing against the wall he had built around it. About Aaliyah staying after class to say, "I thought I was doing the right thing." She thought about what it would feel like to post her video and watch it spread, to have strangers decide whether to believe her, to have her name in the comment sections, her history searched, her past examined for the detail that would let someone build a different story. To become content. To be audited and assigned a verdict by people who would feel certain about it for exactly as long as the algorithm kept her face in their feed. She thought about Deja Morant, not with judgment, not entirely, but with the understanding of someone watching a cautionary tale arrive at its conclusion. Deja had needed to be seen so badly that she had built something large enough to be seen by millions. And what she had built had destroyed a man who was innocent and raised the cost of speaking for every woman watching. That was the part nobody was saying in the think pieces. That was the part that sat in Patience's chest like a stone. She thought about Callum Reese driving home on 4 miles of road, making dinner, sitting at his table. Legally cleared, his name still returning results it would return for years. She thought about Gerald Prout and the faucet. She held her phone for a long time. Then she went to her camera roll. She found the video. She pressed play and watched the first 30 seconds herself upright clear, saying the date and the time and what happened, and she felt something move through her that was grief and certainty and exhaustion all at once. The specific combination of someone making a decision, not because it is right, but because the other options have been made to look worse. She pressed delete. The phone asked, "Are you sure?" She looked at the screen for a long moment. She pressed delete again. She locked the phone. She set it face down on the nightstand. She sat in the dark of her bedroom with her hands in her lap, and the room was quiet, and Gerald Prout was still in the world, and she was still in hers, and the distance between those two facts was not something a video could close anymore. Not after what she had seen. Coda. Nobody would know what she had almost done. Not Gerald Prout, not a detective, not a comment section. Not the millions of people who had watched a different woman's face at 2:03 a.m. and built their certainty before the truth had time to breathe. Nobody. That silence was the cost. Not hers alone to carry, but hers to carry first. Two things are true simultaneously, and the story insists on holding both. False accusations of sexual assault cause real, documented harm to innocent people, and the vast majority of those who report sexual violence are telling the truth. These facts are not in competition. They live alongside each other in the same difficult world. And the damage done by false accusations falls most heavily not on the institution of justice, but on the women with real stories who watch the cost of speaking rise and decide, in the dark, that it has risen too high. Deja Morant had needed to be seen. She had taken a real fear, a door handle 3 seconds, a sound in the night, and built something catastrophic around it because the truth alone was not large enough to be heard. She had harmed a man who was innocent. She had made a weapon out of an accusation and pointed it without aim, and the person struck was not the one she was angry at, and the one she was angry at was not a person at all. It was the accumulated absence of her entire life. No mother, no family, no one who would drive across town, and you cannot convict an absence. So she had found a name instead, and the internet had done the rest. And 40 miles away, the Crestview Apartments parking lot sat empty under the south side lights, and the world that had briefly cared about that parking lot had moved on to the next thing, and the next woman who stood there after dark would stand there alone. And whether she would speak would be shaped, in ways she could never fully trace, by the story of a woman she had never met who had needed too badly to be seen. That is where the story ends. Not with justice, not with its absence. With what comes after both, the specific, ordinary darkness in which real people have to decide without any guarantees whether speaking is still worth what it costs. Some nights it is. Some nights it isn't. Patience sat in the dark and could not tell the difference. Neither could anyone else.